So tonight's talk is called Yale Science Communication, a gut feeling, microbes and their outsized impact. So within each of us, there is an entire world of bacteria and other microorganisms, the consequences of which we are only now beginning to understand. In this talk, Yale Science Communication will discuss some of the ways these microbes impact our daily lives and may lead to new breakthroughs from the food we eat to the potential brain-altering effects. I'd like to welcome our three speakers here. We have Harini Sadeeshkumar, Amy Ontai, and Milind Singh. So I will turn it over to you three. Thank you for being here tonight.
Awesome, thank you so much for having us. So I'll just get started sharing my screen real quick. All right, thanks so much for that great introduction. So as our lovely host just mentioned, our talk is called A Gut Feeling, Microbes and Their Outsized Impact. But before we get into our talk, I'd like to introduce you a little bit more about each of us. So first up, we have Harini Sadeeshkumar, whose department is molecular, cellular, and developmental biology, and whose research is in bacterial response to changes in the environment. A fun fact about Harini is that she liked camping so much that the very first time that she went camping, her first trip was a whole month long. Second up, we have me. Hey, I'm Amy Ontai, and my department is microbial pathogenesis, and my research is in gut bacterial response to stress. So fun fact, in high school, I was president and valedictorian and student body president, etc. at my high school, but I was homeschooled, so I was the only student there. So yeah. And last up, we have Milind Singh, whose department is cell biology, and his research is in impacts of disrupted energy production in the brain. And fun fact, well, you can see Milind has lovely eyebrows right now. He was actually born without eyebrows. So to introduce our talk a little bit, have you ever looked up into the night sky and thought, wow, the universe is so vast and there's just so much that we don't understand? Well, what we're going to talk about today is a hidden universe, but instead of a telescope, you need something called a microscope to see it, which is a tool that scientists use to look at things that are too small to see by the naked eye. So if you scraped off a sample of basically anything on this planet and looked at it under a microscope, you would see things called microbes, or organisms that are too small to be seen by the naked eye. And what we're going to be talking about is how microbes impact our everyday lives, how they impact our health, and possibly our brain function. So a quick overview of today's talk. First up, we will be having Harini talk about MasterChef microbes, everyday microbes creating good gut feelings. Next up, I will be talking about No Guts, No Glory, an inside scoop on the things in your poop. And last but not least, we have Milind talking about the gut-brain connection, or can your gut have feelings? And these will each be about 15 minutes, and we will save our questions for the end. So without further ado, I hand it off to Harini.
Thanks, Amy. Let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone. As Amy mentioned, my name is Harini Sadeeshkumar, and my talk today, called MasterChef Microbes, is all about how microbes are involved in creating the foods that give us good gut feelings every day. Throughout this talk, I will tell you stories of how microbes are essential for growing, processing, and decomposing food. Then I'll explain how they use special proteins called enzymes to convert foods into different forms, and how they use many strategies to compete with each other in the process. So taking a step back, what is a microbe? As Amy mentioned, it's a living organism too small to be seen by the naked eye. A good way to think of it is if it's alive and you need a microscope to be able to see it, it's a microbe. To put this more in context, Taylor Swift is almost 2 meters tall at 5'10". One bacteria called E. coli is 1,000,000 times smaller than her. Microbes can be that size or even smaller. So what's something 1,000,000 times bigger than her? The entire California coastline. So what we are to bacteria is what the California coastline is to us. There are many different types of organisms that are considered to be microbes. While they all play really important roles in their respective environments, the bacteria and fungi are of particular interest to us because of their important connections to food. And I'll talk about several examples of them here today in this talk. Microbes are involved in every stage of food production. They are needed to grow food, they are needed to process raw ingredients into more complex foods, and they are needed to break food waste down back into soil. Let's first look at an example of how microbes help plants in the growing phase. This bacterium called rhizobium is found in these little nodules found on the roots of certain plants. And the job of this bacteria is actually to get nitrogen to the plant, which is something that they need to be able to grow. There's a lot of nitrogen in the air, and rhizobium bacteria can capture that nitrogen and convert it into a form that's easier for the plants to absorb. We talked about how microbes help grow some of these raw ingredients, but they are also vital for major food-making processes, including baking and fermentation. You might have heard that beer and wine are made from fermentation, but so are yogurt, cheese, kimchi, soy sauce, balsamic vinegar, and kombucha. While we use microbes to break down raw ingredients into more delicious foods, sometimes they get ahead of us and start breaking down the food before we want them to. Imagine you're reaching into your fridge for a nice fresh strawberry, but all of a sudden you see this horrible white fuzz has overtaken the entire container. This is actually a very common fungus called Botrytis cinerea, and while it can have some negative health consequences when consumed, its main negative consequence is actually economic. Food spoilers cause tons of food to be discarded each and every year. A more serious consequence is a bacteria like Clostridium botulinum. It likes to grow in low oxygen environments such as that found in pickled foods. It produces a toxin called botulinum toxin that causes a condition called botulism. And in botulism, this actually causes your nerves to stop firing, leading to paralysis and death. But we've decided to take this dangerous toxin and actually inject it right into our faces for Botox. But for those home picklers, don't worry, as long as you sterilize your pickled foods higher than the temperature required to kill bacterial spores, you should be perfectly safe. While we don't want microbes to break down the food in our fridge, we do love them in compost heaps. They're the ones doing all of the labor of decomposing our food scraps. And what this means is that they are breaking down the food into smaller and simpler compounds until the whole thing turns into soil, and we can start this process all over again. Imagine what would happen without them. Actually, during the Carboniferous period, which happened 300 million years ago, we had forests and we had microbes, but the microbes hadn't evolved yet in order to be able to break down wood. So when trees died, they just fell over and piled on top of each other. And all of the weight of these dead trees caused them to be increasingly compressed until they formed all of the coal that we are using today. Luckily, the microbes we have today are able to decompose plant matter, including trees. How are they doing that? They use something called an enzyme. Enzymes are a special type of protein that can perform a specific chemical reaction in the cell. You can think of them as being a tool that can take a starting material called a substrate and break them down. Or they can take multiple substrates and put them together. Different microbes can have different enzymes that take the same starting material but make different final products. And they do this to extract different nutrients that they need to grow and survive. So when we are eating something that microbes were involved in making, we are actually eating their partially digested food. So now that we've talked about enzymes, let's look at a real-world example of how microbes use them to make yogurt. Think about what taste, consistency, flavor you associate with yogurt, and feel free to throw that right into the chat. Oh, sorry, my chat is not popping up. Can Amy or Milind step in and?
Yeah, I gotcha. So we have tangy, sour, tangy, smooth and creamy.
Great, thanks. These are all things that I associate with yogurt. And I also notice it having a thick consistency. But where do these features come from? So we know from looking at the back of a yogurt container that yogurt is made out of milk and live yogurt cultures. So what does that mean? It means that there's bacteria actively growing in the yogurt. So when you next buy yogurt and look at the container, you can actually see the specific species that were used to make it. And here I've highlighted a couple of examples, Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus. And those are almost universally found in yogurt. What are they doing? They're breaking down all of the components of milk into smaller compounds. Milk is made out of water, fat, proteins, including casein and whey, and the sugar lactose. Bacteria have an enzyme called lactase that breaks down lactose sugar into two smaller sugars. And this might sound familiar to those of you guys who might be lactose intolerant. Humans also have this lactase enzyme, and you need it to be able to digest dairy. So those of you who are lactose intolerant don't have this enzyme, or you don't have enough of it. But humans that are lactose tolerant and have this lactase enzyme, this enzyme is found in your small intestine. And so when you consume dairy products, the lactose gets broken down into smaller sugars, which gets absorbed into the body. However, for those of you who are lactose intolerant, if you accidentally consume some dairy, the lactose is going to make it all the way into your large intestine, where bacteria take over and they use their lactase enzyme to break down the sugar. However, they don't stop at the two smaller sugars. They just keep going and break them down further and further until you end up with gas and acids that end up causing indigestion. And the same reactions that happen in the large intestines of those unfortunate individuals who are lactose intolerant and have consumed dairy, those reactions are happening in our yogurt. And specifically, the bacteria is making lactic acid. And the acidity from the lactic acid is actually what causes yogurt to taste tart and sour. So now let's look at what lactic acid does to the proteins in milk. This cartoon represents a protein. You've already heard about how enzymes are a type of protein, and proteins, including enzymes, are folded into very specific shapes that allow them to perform very specific functions. Heat and acidity causes proteins to lose that important shape. And they're still protein, but they're no longer functional. This is called denaturation. When we make yogurt, we are actually heating bacteria at high temperatures and with bacteria, which produces lactic acid, and heat and acidity denature the proteins in milk, including whey and casein. These denatured proteins get all tangled together and thicken, and that's why yogurt gets really thick. Very similar thing happens with eggs when you cook them. When you're cooking an egg, you see the egg going from really liquidy to more and more solid, and that's because all of the proteins get denatured and get tangled. Occasionally, when you've kept milk too long, you'll see that it's gotten really clumpy and curdled. And that's because bacteria can sometimes contaminate our milk. And those bacteria might also have lactase enzymes and break down the lactose sugars, just as lactobacillus does in yogurt. And this is why you might notice that lactose-free milk lasts a lot longer. Bacillus is one of the most common milk spoilers, and it creates these gross, fruity, vinegary flavors that we don't want, in contrast to the tart freshness created by the lactobacillus species that we know and love. So why are our efforts to make delicious fresh yogurt always thwarted by bad bacteria in milk? What if there's already a little bit of bacteria in our milk to start with? What happens then? There's actually a competition. And one way bacteria compete is by changing the pH of their environment. The pH scale tells us how acidic or how basic something is. Things like battery acid and stomach acid are very acidic, whereas drain cleaner and bleach are very basic. Milk is a pH of 6, which is pretty neutral. However, during the yogurt making process, all of the lactic acid produced reduces the pH to 4.4. This might not seem like very much, but most organisms like to survive in a nice neutral pH between 5.5 and 8. So lactic acid producing bacteria are actually shaping their environment such that they can survive in it, but most other organisms wouldn't be able to. Another way that microorganisms compete is by producing toxins that specifically inhibit the growth of similar or closely related species. Streptococcus thermophilus, which is also another bacteria involved in making yogurt, produces a toxin that kills all of the closely related species. And we've exploited these toxins as preservatives when we make processed meats and cheese. And we've discussed a couple of natural ways in which bacteria compete, but we actually rig the competition in favor of the bacteria we like to make yogurt. We heat milk up to 180 degrees in the yogurt making process. And this is actually our way of pasteurizing the milk. That's essentially what that means. We're heating the milk that would kill all of the bacteria. Then we cool the milk back down to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit, nice and chilly. And then we add live cultures, which can literally be a spoonful of yogurt even. And so when we do that, we hold the temperature of the milk at 110 degrees to make this yogurt. Species that make yogurt, including Lactobacillus bulgaricus, are thermophiles, meaning they like to grow best at higher than normal temperatures. So they can survive up to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas most of the bacteria will die by 105 degrees. So by holding the temperature of the milk at 110 degrees, our favorite bacteria automatically win. Our case study illustrates 3 major ways that bacteria compete with each other for resources and survival. Some of these methods are natural and some are aided with our human intervention. Isn't it amazing how we formed alliances with certain microbial species for our mutual benefit? On that note, I hope I've convinced you of how amazing and essential microbes are. They're needed for growing, processing, decomposing food. They have enzymes that break down the substrates and starting materials and create new flavors and textures. And they use many strategies to outcompete other species, some being natural and some through our assistance. And now that I've shown you how microbes help us on the outside, Amy is going to talk to you all about how microbes are important to us on the inside. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, Harini. Let me just get a second here while I share my screen. All right, here we go. All right, and before I get started, let me get my little laser pointer going. All right, thanks, Harini, for that wonderful talk. Now I'm going to be talking to you guys about the bacteria inside of you, specifically in No Guts, No Glory, an inside scoop on the things in your poop. Now, before we get started, I want to talk about a few definitions. So something that we're going to be talking about today is the human microbiome, or all the viruses, fungi, and bacteria that live in your body. In other words, all the microbes that live in your body. For simplicity's sake, we're going to be focusing on bacteria. And to just sort of get an idea of how much bacteria is in your body, if you scraped all of it out and you weighed it, it would be about 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria. For context, that's the same weight as a small chihuahua. So if you think about it, each of us has like a little bacterial chihuahua living inside of us. So to talk about the gut microbiome, we have to kind of go back to our anatomy classes and talk about what our gut looks like inside of us, to specifically focus on the gut microbiome, or all the microbes that live within our gut. So if you remember, food enters into your mouth, down your esophagus, into your stomach, and then into your small intestine, which Harini mentioned is where lactose digestion happens, into your large intestine, and then out of your rectum. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of Zoom participation here, and if you can get ready in the chat. My question is, where do you guys think the gut microbiome begins and ends? On these certain parts of the body, where do you think it starts and where do you think it ends? If you guys can go ahead and tap into the chat, what you guys think. All right, so first up, we have someone saying that your gut microbiome is mainly in your large intestine. So that's partially right. We consider it starts from the stomach and ends at the large intestine. Oh, definitely getting closer, yeah, from the mouth to the rectum. So this is like a contentious point, because some people are like, where does the mouth microbiome begin and where does it end? Stomach to the large intestine. All right, so these are actually wonderful answers. The correct answer is that we generally accept that it goes from your stomach all the way to your rectum, so beyond your large intestine. So as I mentioned here, let me get from your stomach to your anus is where it goes. And fun fact, so this is your anus. Your anus is another word for your butthole, the more you know. So what exactly does it look like in there? So if you took a nice little cross section of your large intestine, you would see that it essentially looks like a giant tube, where on the outside is our own gut lining cells, and on the inside is this mucus that's being secreted. And where bacteria mainly hang out are in the intestinal contents that pass through or on or inside of the mucus layer. If we look even closer, what you would see is there's all of these gut cells and they're lined up very, very tightly and secreting this mucus. So what I'm about to show you is an actual picture of a mouse intestine that has been introduced to bacteria that have been genetically modified to light up a bunch of different colors under the microscope. And so as you can see, our gut lining cells are here in blue, and our mucus layer is here in purple. And all of these different colored rods are bacteria. So like I mentioned, it really is like a hidden universe in there. So you might be looking at all these bacteria and thinking, wow, that is a lot. How exactly did that get inside of me? Well, to answer that question, we kind of have to answer and go back and think, how did you come into the world? Mainly, were you delivered vaginally or via C-section? There's a couple of key differences into how your gut microbiome develops based on how you were delivered. So for example, if you're born vaginally, one of the first bacteria that the baby comes into contact with is lactobacillus, the same family of bacteria that Harini mentioned are present in yogurt. This is because the vagina is mainly colonized by lactobacillus, and so the baby's gut becomes colonized in it, and it actually helps it digest the mother's milk. Additionally, another family of bacteria called Bacteroidetes comes in and expands and takes up a large majority of the population. So this Bacteroidetes is actually a large part of the adult microbiome. And after about 1 to 2 years, the mother's gut microbiome looks very similar to the baby's gut microbiome. However, if you are born via C-section, you get a delayed expansion of this Bacteroidetes, and instead you get an expansion of a bacteria called Clostridia. So if you think about this, it's because the first thing that the baby comes into contact with isn't the vagina, but it's actually the skin. And there's, microbes that live on the skin. So the mother's skin microbiome actually looks much more similar to the baby's gut microbiome. So you might be wondering, does this matter, like if you're born vaginally or C-section, does this affect your development or anything like that? The answer is we don't exactly know. The research is still really out on that. However, all that I do know is that C-sections are in many cases a life-saving procedure, and so obviously they're very important to perform. But in some experimental hospitals, if you sign a lot of waivers, they'll actually take the vaginal secretions and mop it onto the baby. And again, how this affects their development, the research is still out. So I've told you about this hidden universe inside of you and how it gets there. So you might be thinking, okay, it's been there for so long, like what is it doing in there? What does the microbiome do for us? Well, one of the main things that it does for us is involved in nutrition. And to demonstrate this point, I will talk about a lovely Chipotle bowl. So have you ever gone to Chipotle and gotten their lovely corn salsa and then, used the bathroom a couple of hours later and seen that corn salsa again? This is an example of a complex carbohydrate that we're not that good at digesting. However, bacteria are really good at digesting this complex carbohydrate. stuff that hangs out in our large intestine. And so it's estimated that bacteria provide anywhere from up to 10% of our calories. In addition to this, they're kind of like little vitamin factories because bacteria also contribute significant amounts of B12 and vitamin K to us. And something that they're very important for is something called colonization resistance. So to talk about this, I need to define a couple of terms. So by colonization, I mean the presence of a microorganism on or within a space. And the resistance that I'm talking about is to something called a pathogen or a microbe that causes disease. So by colonization resistance, I mean the ability of the gut microbiome to resist the expansion of newly introduced microbes into the digestive tract. So think of it as if like you're trying to enter a really crowded subway car, which you might have experience with if you have gone to New York City during rush hour. So if you try to get into the subway car, most often people don't want you to get in there and will push you out. Also, it's really hard to get in there because there's not that much space left. So it's pretty similar to our guts, right? Like it's very densely packed with bacteria already. So for newly introduced microbes to come in and expand is really hard because there's not enough physical space really that's available. And there's also, not a lot of food that's left that's available. So we've learned about what the microbiome does for us. What do we do for the microbiome? Essentially, we're just a big bag of food for them. It's really warm, it's protected, and it's dark and anaerobic, meaning that there's no oxygen in our guts, which is really important for some bacteria to live and thrive there. Essentially, we're kind of like a big vending machine for these bacteria. So you may be thinking, we do things for the microbiome and the microbiome does things for us. We must be living in perfect harmony, right? Well, not exactly. There are some things short-term that can perturb the gut environment. So for example, if you have to take a short course of antibiotics, or maybe you get the stomach flu, this will change the type of bacteria that are inside of your gut. And this can, have different effects on your health, like maybe it causes inflammation or some other effect. Additionally, there's things that are more long-term that can affect what bacteria are inside of your gut. So like, for example, if you have a chronic disease like Crohn's disease, or what diet you eat every day. So what we're going to talk about a little bit more is how your diet impacts the microbiome. And to talk about this, I'm going to be using a mouse study. So in this mouse study, mice were fed one of two different diets. One was a fiber-rich diet and one was a fiber-free diet. So in the fiber-rich diet, there's a lot of these complex carbohydrates that I was talking about that bacteria love to eat. And in the fiber-free diet, there's a lot of really simple carbohydrates and high fat to make up for the same amount of calories as the fiber-rich diet. So this is just like a graphic illustration of the findings of the study. But as you can see here, you have your healthy gut lining cells and this nice thick mucus layer, which is secreted by them. And in the study, there was also a lot of these plant-degrading microbiome members, which made up a large part of the population, and a couple of these mucus-degrading microbiome members, which didn't make up as large of a part of the population. Additionally, there were pathogens present. However, because there was this nice thick mucus layer, they weren't really able to come into contact with the gut lining cells of the mice. However, in the fiber-free diet, you can see that these mucus-degrading microbiome members made up a large amount of the population, and in turn, ate a lot of the mucus because these plant-degrading microbiome members didn't have as much to eat and were much smaller in number and allowed these guys to expand. In turn, this allowed pathogens to come into contact with the gut lining cells and actually made the mice very sick. So in summation, eat your vegetables or your bacteria will eat you. So you might be wondering, how do we learn more about the microbiome? Like, how do we do studies like this? Well, something that's really important to take into account is we need to study bacteria within the context of the gut. So for example, if you scraped like a bacterium out of my gut and like put it onto a plant, first of all, it might not survive because there's oxygen. And second of all, it would probably behave very differently than in my gut. So we need to really study it within the context of the gut. And second, if we want to think about just studying the impact of only the microbiome, we have to really control for things like genetics, diet, and environment, which are different between humans, to make sure that what we're looking at is really just the microbiome. However, if we did want to control for all of these things in humans, essentially what we'd have to do is clone people and put them in bubbles and make them live like that the rest of their life, which is not exactly kosher. So what do we do instead? Enter something called the germ-free mouse model. So mice, just like us, are born with a native microbiome, and they have bacteria and other microbes on and inside of them since birth. However, germ-free mice are born in completely sterile conditions without any microbes in or on or inside of them. Additionally, these mice are genetically the same because they've been inbred so much. And they also can all have the same diet, the same environment, because initially they don't have any bacteria. We can control what bacteria go inside of them. So fun side note, this is what a germ-free mouse facility looked like in the 1940s. In order to enter, you had to wear a hazmat suit and then climb up this ladder and shower in bleach, where this guy would watch you shower in bleach and be like, oh, you missed a spot, and you'd have to lean over this way or lean over this way to make sure you were entirely covered in bleach. Then you would swim through this tank of bleach where this other guy would look at you, and then you would open the airlock and work with the animals in the animal chamber. However, this didn't work super well and would get, contaminated a lot. And so what does the modern germ-free mouse facility look like, which is a facility that I work in pretty often? Well, this is what the modern germ-free mouse facility looks like. Essentially, mice live in this nice bubble, which has filtered air pumped into it, and all the conditions in here are completely sterile, where the mice are born and live. And if you want to bring anything inside, you have to go through this contraption, which has 2 different airlocks. So if you want to bring in food or bedding, you put in the food or bedding, close this first airlock, open this, spray in a bunch of bleach, close this cap, wait for it to disinfect, and then you can bring it inside. Also on this other side right here, you have gloves that you can stick your hands in, and that allows you to work with the mice. In addition to all of that, you are wearing a full gown, booties, gloves, and a mask and a hairnet. So while germ-free mice are not simple to work with, I'm very glad I don't have to swim through a swimming pool of bleach to go to work every day. So something that germ-free mice have allowed us to study are like really cool links between the microbiome and our health. And so one of these links is between obesity and the microbiome. So in this one germ-free mouse study, there was 2 groups of mice that were given the microbiome of 2 different human twins. So these twins were genetically identical and they were raised in the same environment. However, one of them was obese and one of them was lean. And so one group of mice got the microbiome of the lean twin. One of the groups of mice got the microbiome of the obese twin. They were all given the same diet and then measured after a certain amount of weeks. So the lean mice that got the lean microbiome stayed lean. However, the mice that received the obese microbiome gained weight. So this study is actually one of the first things that showed that the microbiome is involved in obesity. And actually, this is also true in humans. So in some cases, if you receive an infection in the hospital called Clostridium difficile infection, where a bacteria takes over your gut, it's life-threatening, and one of the ways that you can survive is through a stool transplant, which is where you take someone else's poop and put it where your poop goes, and you essentially get that person's microbiome. So in order to get this life-saving procedure, this woman got this infection, she got a stool transplant from her daughter. And this woman had been lean her entire life, and her daughter had been obese her entire life. But after this woman received this stool transplant, she also became obese. So this link is also true in humans. So in summation, we all have a bacterial chihuahua living inside of us. And this chihuahua giveth and it taketh away, depending on our environment and how we treat it. Additionally, germ-free mice are a really cool tool that have allowed us to understand a lot of different links between the microbiome and our health. And basically, we have a hidden depth to us, an entire universe that we can't even see, which Milind will talk about more in his talk. So I will pass this off to Milind.
Alrighty, thanks, Amy. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okie dokie. Awesome. All right. Thanks a lot, Amy and Harini, for those wonderful talks. Hello, everyone. My name is Milind, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about the gut-brain connection. Specifically, can your gut have feelings? So briefly, I'll talk about what happens after your food reaches your gut. Then we'll talk about this sort of crosstalk between the gut and the brain. And finally, I'll talk about some current research and how any of you can actually contribute. So let's talk first about what happens when all of this delicious food reaches your gut. Well, I'm going to draw an analogy to the enzyme substrate stuff that Harini talked about. So what you can think about is that food is like a substrate, right? Like this. And then what happens is that your food reaches your gut, where it is acted upon by many, many enzymes present in your gut, and they break this down into products. And these products are basically different kinds of molecules. And this is just a representation that we scientists have to show, which just depicts a molecule. And there are many, many kinds of molecules which come together, various shapes and sizes, and they build us up. And you're looking at a photo of a man who's looking at the very molecules that will later build him up. So a natural question then that arises is that how do these molecules reach all parts of our body? Well, the answer is life-saving, and it's simple. It's blood. Our blood is part of this very elaborate, very fascinating system called the circulatory system, which comprises of the heart. So the heart pumps your blood to different parts of your body, and the blood carries all the nutrients with it. And you can think of this as similar to a plumbing system in your house with elaborate connections, but carrying water. So this is just a summary of all what I just said. So the food reaches your gut, where it's converted into these molecules, and these molecules then go to various parts of your body, zipping across, zooming across, all kinds of directions, velocities. And one important destination that the molecules reach is the brain. And the rest of my talk will focus extensively on that. So before doing that, I want to throw a definition at you, because that's what a lot of us scientists like doing. So this sort of connection between the gut and the brain is called the gut-brain axis. And now I think, like, after seeing that diagram of the circulatory system, you'll be wondering, well, it seems like every part of the body is connected to each other. What is so special about the gut and the brain? Like, why should we care about this? So the rest of my talk will be kind of like going into depths about this, looking at more of the scientific picture. But before I do that, I just want to pause for a second and kind of think about the day-to-day feelings that kind of like give rise to this thought at first. So like while I'm giving this thought with this talk, I'm having a lot of butterflies in my stomach. So that itself is like something uncanny, right? If you just think about it, it's like, why do you feel butterflies in your stomach? Is there something that's, you know, linking your gut and your brain? Something fishy there. And so let's turn to science to tell us more about this connection. And so I'm going to tell you guys a study where these scientists use these conventional happy mice. And so these mice have their own gut microbes living in them, thriving. And so what they did to these mice is that they stressed them out. And after stressing these mice out, Jerry, as my mouse became slightly stressed, as you can see from Jerry's look. And so the way that the scientists measure these kind of like stress is by examining levels of molecules in blood. And so you can measure the molecules and essentially tell whether something is stressed or not. And so interestingly, when the scientists did the same sort of experiments with germ-free mice, which is the mice which does not have gut microbes, microbiome, as talked to you by Amy. So a very interesting thing happens when you stress them out, which is that they become very, very stressed. As you can see from Jerry looking extremely stressed. And this is not Tom, by the way, which is causing the stress. And so finally, what these scientists did was the killer experiment, as we scientists like to say, is that they put the original gut microbes of the mouse back in it, and then they stressed them out in a similar way. What they found out was that these mice now become slightly stressed, just like the normal conventional mice were. So this was very interesting, and this kind of like tells us that the gut microbes are somehow involved in mood regulation, right? And this was one of the first studies to show a possible connection between the gut microbiome and mood. Again, a lot of you guys would be wondering that, well, these are just mice, right? What about us humans? Could this apply to us humans as well? And so that was what a few other scientists did. And so these scientists were looking at the composition of gut microbes in people with and without depression. So I'm going to show you guys a graph that summarizes the study, where the y-axis tells the number of bacteria and the x-axis denotes the types of bacteria. So what they did is that they measured, so in people without depression, when they measured the composition of bacteria, they found that the number of good bacteria, which are bacteria known to be associated with good gut health and good immune system function, they found that number to be higher than the number of bad bacteria, which are bacteria that are known to cause diseases, that are not good for your immune system, just not good altogether. However, when they did this same sort of calculation with people with depression, they found an exact opposite case, whereas the number of these bad bacteria seemed to increase as compared, or increase as compared to the number of good bacteria. Now, there are a couple of things I want to say about this. So scientists don't know whether it is because of the depression that the number of these bacteria or the type of bacteria are changing. So we really don't know whether it is that the bad bacteria cause depression, or is it that the depression causes the number of bad bacteria to increase. And so this is all a work in progress, and many scientists are hard at work trying to figure out what exactly is going on behind this sort of numbers that we are seeing. Now, I've told you all of this about this sort of like, gut microbe having that effect on mood and possible connection here. But how does this communication really happen? How is it that these things reach our brain or maybe affecting our brain health? The answer again is we really don't know. Scientists are at work trying to figure this out extensively. But what I'm going to show you in the coming few slides is something that scientists think is a possible cause. And so we know from briefly from what Amy talked about, the fact that gut microbes, they seem to be doing a lot of work for us, right? They seem to be digesting stuff and producing these molecules. So I'm going to show you examples of molecules that gut microbes are producing, which may actually be having some effect on us. And so again, I want to draw you guys back to this beautiful galaxy of microbes present in your gut, right here, right now, and talk about two particular molecules that they produce. So one of them is called serotonin. I'm sure a few of you would have heard of this molecule. So it's involved in social interaction regulation, regulation of sleep, mood regulation. And in fact, it's so important that a lot of common antidepressants enhance the effect of serotonin. So that just tells you how crucial this molecule is. And so what is truly fascinating about this molecule is that 90% of your body's serotonin is actually made in the gut. Now, we don't really know how exactly this happens and how that is transferred to the rest of your body, but figuring that out could be really crucial to figure out a lot of diseases and cures to them, potentially. Another molecule I want to talk about is called indole. And so this molecule is really interesting. It belongs to this class of molecules called antioxidants that stop the creation of molecules that destroy cells like those in our brain. And this molecule is actually so important that it's being studied for therapeutic uses to cure Alzheimer's disease, which is a disease that affects a lot of elderly people in the world. And just to tell you guys a little more about Alzheimer's, here's a picture. So to the left is a picture of a healthy brain. And you can see it's like nice and plump. Whereas to the right is a brain from a severe Alzheimer's patient. And you can see that the brain has really shrunk. There are these holes, crevices that appear, and things are generally not looking really good. And indeed, they have consequences in the sense that Alzheimer's patients typically exhibit memory loss and side effects. So you can imagine like having a cure for Alzheimer's would be really, really good. And what is fascinating about this molecule is that it is produced by only one bacterial species in our gut. And again, figuring out how exactly this is happening and using that mechanism for potential therapeutic purposes would be a dream come true. And this is just a tip of our iceberg. There are many, many molecules produced by our gut bacteria. And so these particular type of molecules actually belong to this field of research called psychobiotics, which is really interesting. This is a field that's a very nascent field where scientists are actually using live bacteria, which when ingested might confer mental health benefits by directly affecting your microbiome composition. So the way it works is that you increase the number of these good bacteria, these good soldiers in your body, which then improve brain health, and that helps to possibly cure diseases. So again, this is a very new sort of concept, new field of study. A lot of research is being done. Nothing is conclusive so far. So things are still being figured out, but don't be surprised if down the line, 20, 30 years or so, you actually hear of therapies or probably earlier, coming from this particular field of research. Another really exciting current research that I want to highlight to you guys is called the American Gut Project. And so this is a really interesting project, and it's sort of a part of this broad initiative called the Microseta Initiative. And so American Gut Project is just part of this. And what this initiative is trying to do is figuring out how alike in terms of the gut microbiome are we, across different people from different parts of the world, essentially. And so if you guys, and any of you can sign up for this project, if you sign up for this project right now, they will send you guys a kit. And this kit, what you have to do is essentially send back your poop samples to the lab. And when you do that, the lab will then analyze the sort of gut microbe composition in your gut and essentially compare it to different gut populations across different human beings across the globe, actually. And so you'll be part of research that's cutting edge research that's happening right now and contribute to real science. So go you guys. And so essentially what this project the dream for this project is to figure out how exactly is it that diet has an effect on your gut microbes and vice versa. And also how is it that environment, the kind of like places you grow in and so on and so forth has an effect on you, on your gut microbes. And is there a way we can tweak that and potentially use that for our own benefit? And so to find more details about this, you can go onto this website. And as a short side note, now because of COVID, they have actually stopped this kind of research and this kind of like analyzing data, and they're looking more at COVID samples, essentially patients having COVID, and they're looking at whether COVID essentially impacts your gut microbe composition in any way. So that's what's going on right now. So if you sign up for this project, you will be actually contributing to COVID research in this area. And with all of that, I just want you guys to take away these 3 key points. First of it is that I hope I could convince you guys that there is more than a physical connection that may be there between the gut and the brain, and sort of this idea that there's more sort of crosstalk that's going on, which might be helpful for us, which we can use maybe. Another key takeaway is that your gut microbes are producing so many things for you, and they're really helping you so much for your day-to-day function. And finally, I hope I could convince you guys about this like exciting field of research called psychobiotics and these sort of American Gut Project type projects that are going on, trying to understand what exactly or how exactly our gut microbes affect us and how we are affected essentially by our environment. And with that, I just want to leave you guys with this sort of tagline, which is a healthy gut is a healthy brain, is a healthy you. And with that, I would like to let Amy conclude our talk. Thanks all for coming. And let's have Amy do her thing.
Yeah, I have written a song on the ukulele, which I will play now. Sugar and spice, a few microbes would be nice to turn your milk into yogurt, or your food scraps back in the dirt. You have so many friends, you just can't see them. They live in your gut, and you better feed them. They'll make you crazy, make you sad. They'll eat all your mucus if you make them mad. The microbes follow you wherever you go. The microbes, you're a place they call home. Yeah. Thank you. And with that, we will take questions. I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. So first off, we have, does taking Metamucil/fiber help? And I guess the question is like, what exactly does it help? Definitely like having a higher fiber intake would help making your bowel movements more regular, if that's what you're interested in. And Harini might be able to answer the difference between a probiotic and a prebiotic.
Yeah, so the difference between a probiotic and a prebiotic is that a probiotic is a live bacteria that you'll consume for your benefits, such as, yogurt is a live bacterial culture. So you're consuming bacteria that might be able to help you in your gut. And a prebiotic is kind of like taking fiber, specific supplements that feed the good bacteria in your gut and help them sort of win that competition.
And I think we'll get to a couple of these Q&A and then some people have their hands raised, but there's two questions that I feel like are kind of related. So Steve Gundry, the plant paradox, opinions on that, and also what can we do to have a healthy gut? So I Googled the plant paradox by Steve Gundry, and this is a diet that is free of lectins, and so free of grains, quinoa, legumes, nightshades, dairy, etc. I will say that none of us are medical professionals, and everyone's diet should be tailored to what makes you feel good. Mainly what we've presented here is just what the microbiome field says, and other research studies said that having fiber is good to keep you regular, and a lot of bacteria in your gut eat fiber and do enjoy that. So whatever diet you should follow and what you should do to have a healthy gut is definitely something you should talk to your medical doctor about, because that's not exactly what our degrees are in. But yeah, just from the research that I presented, having vegetables in your diet is not maybe the worst thing. So I see that there's a couple people with their hands raised, so I'm gonna let C. Daniel Ward talk right now to ask a question. If we have someone that had a question. All right, well, in the meantime, we will let's go back to our Q&A, which is definitely popping right now. Can you manipulate your gut microbiome? And I would say yes. So like I mentioned, if you have a disease, a hospitalized disease like Clostridium difficile, where a bacteria takes over your gut microbiome, one of the ways you can manipulate your gut microbiome is through a stool transplant, where you actually get the microbiome of somebody else. And also in cases where you've taken antibiotics, you can take probiotics to restore some of those bacteria. And
I can even add on that just changing your diet can affect your microbiome. So if you drastically change what you're eating, that'll definitely manipulate your microbiome.
Yeah, and a crazy thing is that the effect on microbiome can actually also be pretty transient. So if you eat something over a period of a day, it can actually affect your gut microbiome composition even on a daily basis.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a couple of questions for Milind here in the chat about PhD.
Yeah. So I'm answering this question from Laura McGarry. And she asked whether the studies of whether there are studies of gut microbes in connection to ADHD. So I'm not aware of any, and I think one important conclusion, one important thing I want to say is that these are mere number correlations, and we really don't exactly know whether there is actually a direct connection between gut microbes and ADHD or any these mental diseases. It could merely be a correlation, because in terms of if you don't have good health, that may be affecting your bacteria, and that might not have anything to do with your mental health per se, if that makes sense. So I'm not aware of any, and there are definitely no conclusive studies that show correlations of these sort of direct connections between your gut microbes and any mental disorder.
I think there's one question that we should probably address is, I assume we should minimize the use of antibiotics. I would like to say that if your doctor prescribes you antibiotics, you should 100% take them, because in some cases they're very life-saving, but it does alter your microbiome for a short period of time. And if you're concerned about it, maybe just drink some kombucha or eat some yogurt or kimchi during that course. But yeah.
Another quick question I want to answer is from Mahima Singh, and she asked whether I know of any foods which would be mood enhancing. There is no data to suggest of this. There are no studies which extensively can conclude that a particular food is mood enhancing or not. So we can't really say anything about that as of now. Let's see.
I think you have a question about how long has the field of psychobiotics been around?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's a great question. I actually am not sure. I listened to a TED talk which was pretty recent. So I don't have a good answer to that, but that's a great question. All I've heard is that it's a very new field and it's just coming up. But yeah, that's a good question. Sorry.
I see
Yeah,
that
and I
Mary
don't
Alice,
think. Sorry, just completing that question. I don't think. I'm not aware of this being part of psychology research, but I might be wrong.
I think Mary Alice Bryan has had her hand raised for a bit, so I'm going to allow her to talk if she wanted to ask a question. But in the meantime, if you guys wanted to answer any other questions.
So I just wanted to ask about the gut serotonin connection. I just always thought that serotonin was produced in the brain, and so depression was very much connected to serotonin levels. I just don't recall coming across anything about the gut, although, you know, am somewhat aware of the fact that gut is becoming more and more understood to be determining so much about our health. So if you could just talk about that a little.
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question, Mary. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Sorry. Yeah. But that's a great question, and actually it's very interesting. Like when I look at papers talking about this sort of serotonin in the gut and the brain, they just know this in terms of numbers, and scientists are just trying to figure out how this happens. We also don't know how exactly the serotonin reaches the brain. There are these like theories about it, but nobody's really sure. Nobody has shown it conclusively. All we know is in terms of numbers, 90% of it is produced in your gut. We don't know how it goes to the brain, but it certainly could, but we don't really know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
All right, I see we also have had Christy Fountain, who has also had her hand raised, so we will allow her to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've never done this. My question was, with all your knowledge about the microbiome, has it affected the way you make choices about what you eat?
I guess like I can go into this a little bit because yeah, I do like after reading that study, I was kind of like, wow, I should eat more vegetables. So I do try to eat like more vegetables pretty often. And I do eat quite a few fermented foods, but I also feel like that's taste. But something that's really interesting is like one of the people in like the gut microbiome field that's really prominent that does a lot of this research. He eats like a lot of fermented foods, but take that as you will, because that is like what his research supports, and obviously you have a bias for your own research, so yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think Milind, maybe you can answer this. Does the vagus nerve connect the gut to the brain?
Oh, I just typed it out.
Oh, you just typed it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that should hopefully answer it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So I see a question about whether probiotics would limit the variability of your microbiome when taken continuously. I would say that it should be fine. Like it shouldn't drastically change the composition as long as, you know, especially if you need it, you should definitely keep taking it. And of course, like all of the other things you consume and your other behaviors will affect your microbiome as well.
Yeah, and something also about probiotics in the gut. So like I mentioned, it's really crowded in there and it's hard for like newly incoming microbes to really like make a space in there. So sort of what is the idea in the field right now is that when you take probiotics, they don't really stay within your body for that long. It's more like, you know, passing through and transit for a couple of days. So it probably long-term won't like change what your microbiome looks like, but you know, it will change, it will have different products that those microbes make like go through your gut. And so how that affects it, yeah, that might change something. But definitely take probiotics if they are prescribed by your doctor, or if they make you feel good and you're not harming yourself.
And if they're tasty, I mean, they're pretty tasty ones out there.
Yeah.
Can vouch for.
No, definitely.
Okay, I seen a really cool question by Ravjot. I was not aware of that. So he says that he read a study involved where they studied the gut microbe of astronauts and the long-term effects of space on microbiome. I think I skipped it. I'm not sure what to say, but I'll definitely check it out. Like I'm sure it will definitely have an effect, but not sure what exactly that could be.
Yeah, I imagine also like because the foods that you eat as astronauts are, all dehydrated and stuff, and there's probably some nutrients that are lost through that process. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, space travel has all sorts of impacts on your body, so it wouldn't be surprising if it also affects bacteria. But I guess I don't think any of us are super familiar with the data to comment on it extensively.
Harini, I feel like there's a question in here for you. Beer is nutritious, right?
Well, it's not a probiotic because they pasteurize beer, so there's nothing live in there, but I guess in theory, it could affect your microbiome in terms of like what's in beer could feed your microbiome. And there was this case where, like in rare instances, your microbiome can create alcohol in your gut. There was actually this very unfortunate situation where this woman kept getting pulled over for drunk driving, but even though she wasn't drinking, and it turned out it was that every time she ate bread, her gut microbiome made like ethanol out of it. And so then she had to stop eating bread. So that's not so common.
All right, I think those might be all maybe one last question for Milind. Can anyone comment on the relationship between the microbiome and Parkinson's disease?
Yeah, again, there's no conclusive data yet on this relation, yeah. But hopefully in the future.
Yeah, so I think those are all the questions.
That was excellent. Thank you all so much. And thank you for that beautiful song at the end, Amy.
Thank you.
It seems like people were really engaged and we had a ton of questions. So thank you for answering all of those.
Yeah, totally.
Of course. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun.
Yeah, thank you guys for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. And just so that everyone knows, I know there were a few questions in the chat. Our 3 speakers tonight have given permission for this to be recorded. So this will be posted to the library's YouTube channel in the next day or so, if you want to refer back to it. Well, have a great night, guys.
Awesome.
Good night. Thanks for having
Good night,
us.
guys.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.